Welcome back to Next Gen Investing. It is time for Under 30 as we look at the nuclear space and some of these up-and-comers. Joining us now, George Tsilis, Senior Markets Correspondent for the Schwab Network, to discuss Oklo. This is a stock that if it hasn't been on your radar, it is now, because this thing has moved a lot in the last few months, George.
Yeah, it has, Alex. And if you look at, the stock performance over the last year, you'll notice that the stock actually just came out of nowhere earlier this year because it's a reverse merger via SPAC. And obviously there's trends, very powerful trends associated with the hyperscalers and real demand for electricity, in particular because of these new Blackwell chips and the Hopper chips, which are already very large energy consuming technologies. It's just going to get worse in terms of demand for electricity. So obviously, if you look at the group, many of the utilities, and particularly those that are basically contract utilities that are independent, you'll see them across the board, like VST, but also Constellation Energy Group, NRG, just to name a few. These companies have actually done tremendously well this year at price performance-wise, but there's a whole group of stocks like Oklo, which are sort of a subset group in the nuclear power space, which we know as an industry has been lost and forgotten. I think this is a revitalization, secular revitalization that we're going to see in this particular energy space. Now, Oklo itself as a company actually operates under an umbrella of companies that are designing these small modular reactors. In other words, modular reactors that can be moved from location to location to provide on-demand nuclear energy, which is a novel and unique concept considering traditional utilities that are nuclear fuel concentrated are fixed and stationary sorts of reactors. So ideally, this is a novel idea, and Oklo itself as a business is past the development stage of its design stage of its technologies. It's now in the development stage of its Aurora facilities. And they're gaining actually some large customer interest for these technologies, and added to the credibility of the business, you're getting some financial analysts like Wedbush, which are now starting to initiate coverage on the stock, and they actually initiated coverage on the stock with a $25 target.
So, George, I do think that it's expected that the Trump administration will be a friend to the nuclear space, but I also know there's still like major infrastructure and like grid constraints that, I mean, are just like the capacity of energy that I see as maybe like a way in which we could limit some of its growth. I mean, is that still a headwind? Because, I mean, as much as nuclear energy I can see and understand the case for AI, there's also still constraints that are just somewhat out of this company's control.
That's correct. I mean, the electricity, we take electricity for granted, frankly. I mean, if you just think about it, we just expect it to be there, but it's actually quite complex. And it's complex from a logistics standpoint, from a transmission standpoint, infrastructure standpoint. It's extremely complex. It's extremely legal orientated because you have rights of way and property elements you have to deal with. So you can't increase capacity, especially transmission capacity, easily and quickly. So you really have sort of a very low increase in the availability of electricity. But prices move first, and prices are telling us, especially forward prices for electricity, just look at some of these independent power producers that I mentioned earlier in the segment, have taken off in terms of their price action. So I think that to alleviate some of these other transmission constraints, it's to basically move power to the site. And essentially, that's what Oklo and that whole subset group of businesses can provide. So I will say this, that you have to consider risk because Oklo itself as a business hasn't generated any revenue. It's a $2.5 billion market cap, so it's small, and that means it can move quite substantially based upon traders' preference. They're still losing money, but nonetheless, there is interest in deregulation and, of course, making the regulatory environment for these companies more favorable under the Trump administration.
Yeah, and I think a really interesting one to watch, frankly, of 2024 as it's had a banner year. But we will leave it there. Appreciate it, George.